For this week's guide, we wanted to cover playing from behind in low elo once again. So we did our standard send Hector to low elo thing to show us how it's done deal. Spoiler alert, the same thing that always happens happened. He decided to give over a ton of kills to fall behind in his games, giving his opponents massive leads. But at the end of the day, it never really matters. He's always able to come back into the game, be super farmed, and hard carry most of the games regardless of any early deficit. Obviously that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that's been watching our guides for a while. There is something we don't really ever discuss though, which is actually the clip gathering process for these types of videos. You see, we generally send Hector to somewhere in gold, as that's where a lot of our viewers play. Sadly, he has one major recurring problem in this ELO bracket when it comes to gathering footage: his opponents making the comeback too easy.
I don't know what to say. Oh my god, screw it, I'm just gonna kill him.
This is by far his most frustrating experience, where he simply feels that there's not much to learn from his comebacks. His opponents just run it down into him and he gets kills randomly. The issue is that ideally, he wants to come back or win by doing proactive things that we can actually teach you all to help you in your own games. For example, for a bot lane video, he demonstrated the cheeky freeze denial trick you can pull off by walking past an enemy tower. It's not very relevant for mid lane, but that's generally the type of stuff we're looking for when gathering footage. Unfortunately, most games aren't like that, and in reality, most low elo players just passively throw their leads. So we figured we'd actually discuss that instead. For this guide, instead of focusing on what Hector is doing well in low elo, we'll be looking at the simple mistakes his opponents make, which allow him to always come back into games. Let's kick things off with one of the biggest errors that immediately throws an early lead. That was made very prevalent by how Hector was playing his games. So he was just handing kills over early on to his opponents, right? Well, let's say that you're the Zed here who just got handed a freebie. What would you do the second that you killed Echo? Letting the wave freeze and immediately basing is definitely the correct answer here. Instead, Zed chooses to try to shove out the wave, which is a huge error, much to Hector's dismay.
This is pretty bad because the wave is frozen, like he just screwed himself, so I just have to fix it for him. Otherwise he's actually going to be behind even though I gave him a kill.
Always keep in mind that you need to be very cautious when it comes to scoring early kills. During the first few levels, the death timers are really low and your wave clear is quite weak. On top of the home guard boots you get after respawning, and you don't have a lot of time to push out the wave. Your opponent getting back to lane and freezing is a huge threat. Even if you score a kill, losing 2 or 3 waves during the early game is way worse since minion experience is so valuable at that point in the game. This mistake is way too common. Hector was actively trying to put himself as far behind as possible. He'd push the wave early so that when he died, it would be freezing away from him. But his opponents always mindlessly pushed it whenever he died. This led to situations where he was actually still ahead of his opponents if he played things properly after dying.
Well, despite how horribly I'm playing, I can still freeze against this guy if I felt like it.
Another way an early kill can go wrong is actually when your opponent is running teleport. You may have actually experienced this yourself, as it's basically the same thing that we just discussed. If you commit a lot of resources into killing the enemy laner and they just teleport back, then you're just stuck in a freeze. As we said, losing 2 or 3 waves early game to a freeze is not worth an early kill. It's sometimes literally wrong to score a kill on your opponent simply because teleport is so overpowered. Obviously, Hector knows that and hands over another kill so that the advantage is completely negated. But we do want to recommend that you always think about what the consequences could be if you spend too many resources on a kill against someone with TP. Only 100% commit to a kill if you know you can crash the wave before your opponent respawns. It might also be helpful to reconsider how you view teleport versus combat summoner spells in general. Think stuff like Ignite, Cleanse, Exhaust, etc. as scaling summoner spells. You should actually be playing safely when you run them, since they'll be more useful later on in skirmishes and teamfights. Then consider teleport as the most aggressive summoner spell. Lane states matter so much more during the early game, which makes teleport's ability to reset the lane at any moment a very aggressive option. So don't feel bad if you're losing lane with Ignite, since it actually scales into the late game much better than teleport, at least in solo queue. The second common way that low elo players with leads throw is by taking way too many risks. There's plenty of games like League of Legends that are based on imperfect information. Basically, based on what you can see, you sometimes have to make choices that are statistically likely to succeed, but aren't necessarily guaranteed to work out. To get a lead in the first place, you very likely had to go for some trades or maybe even an all-in. Interacting with your opponents is usually a risk. They could have potentially dodged your skill shots or outplayed you. But the idea is that you took 70-30 or 80-20 type of fights that more often than not should go in your favor. The problem we see is that when low elo players get leads, a lot of them tend to not adapt their risk management whatsoever. But when you already have a lead, you have the luxury of minimizing the amount of risk that you have to take. For example, this dive bot lane by the Veigar was incredibly overforced. Again, this tilted Hector because this is not how he wants to come back into the game at all.
Why is this happening?
We're not sure exactly what Veigar was thinking, but perhaps it was something like this. Oh, it's unlikely that anyone is here defending MF. If we dive and kill her, she'll fall really far behind. But why take that risk? He's winning and Veigar scales incredibly well. There's no need for him to do anything like this. Risk management is a very important concept to master if you're going to avoid throwing games. For example, let's say you're a level 10 Malzahar who is around half health and mana. You're against a level 8 Qiyana, whom you've killed 3 times already, but she's setting up a freeze with a slight health lead over you. Pushing out the wave isn't too difficult in a 1v1 scenario, but you have no idea where the enemy jungler is. In that case, it's best to just back off and reset. No, it's not ideal, but losing a couple of waves at level 10 is much less impactful than at level 3. It's much better to base than risking the game by getting ganked and potentially allowing the enemy Qiyana to come back into the game with a shutdown. Let's review a similar example. Imagine you're a level 5 Fizz against a Kassadin who is attempting to freeze near his tower. You want to push and reset, but you don't know where the enemy jungler is. In that case, it may definitely be worth the risk to push aggressively in the lane to try and crash the wave. The matchup is already awful for Fizz, and allowing Kassadin to deny 2 or 3 waves that early into the game would be devastating for the Fizz. As a small side note, that's usually the reason why late game champions tend to be easier to play in solo queue. Risk management is easier when you always have the I outscale anyway fallback plan. Next up, we have another tactic in solo queue that isn't often associated with risk taking, but it definitely can be depending on the game's situation, and that's roaming. It's very consistent that when low elo players get a lead, they tend to over roam very frequently. This is actually one of the most consistent things that you can exploit when trying to catch back up. One of the main reasons is that lower elo players tend to not know what to do when their opponent is playing overly safe. Playing safe is definitely one of the ways to get your opponents to start roaming. Not leaving your tower in low elo literally blows people's minds away. They don't know what to do anymore, then they get bored, which usually means that they perma-roam to try and find some action. That may prompt you to ask, well, what's wrong with that? If you have a lead, you should aim to extend it by helping your side lanes or getting dragons, right? Well, that's not a terrible mindset, and roaming can definitely be very effective.
Goodbye, friends. Nothing I can do for you.
Hector was so far behind that his teammates paid the price, and all he could do was freeze in mid while Fizz made a super good play by roaming. It's not that all roams are bad, but low percentage roams are what really throws games for low elo players. There's a difference between ganking a 10% HP over extending Nasus and ganking a fed Ezreal and Janna, who both have summoners up and are full HP. The problem becomes worse when you start over roaming when mid lane gets to the instant clear part of the laning phase. Around level 7 or 9 is when most mid laners can instantly shove in waves within like 4 or 5 seconds. It's not that Fizz was always missing farm by trying to roam, he very often came back to catch the wave, but leaving Hector alone in the lane for a few seconds as Victor just gave him priority over and over again. Then he can use that priority for whatever he needs, such as basing, doing a jungle camp, or committing to his own roam if he wanted to. And that's literally all he did to come back in this game. He played extremely safely, which likely tilted Fizz, and then he just pushed waves whenever Fizz roamed out of boredom. So, what should Fizz be doing instead? He should just be killing Hector on cooldown. He did manage it once when Hector messed up, which begs the question why he didn't try it more often. Imagine for a second this Fizz is Faker. No, wait, even better, imagine he's McBaze. Do you think they'd be roaming here or just ulting Victor on cooldown since they have 3 kills and 2 levels over him? They would instantly ult because they know their limits and know that a squishy Victor should instantly die if their Shark lands. They would also punish Hector's safe play that he only gets away with in low elo. Playing overly safely is very risky if your opponents know how to punish. In this case, maybe Fizz feels that he can't die. Sure, then just freeze the wave. If Hector never fights for wave control, then the Fizz can do whatever he wants with it. By freezing, Hector has to come out of his turret's safety, and then Fizz could just kill him. Another punish to safe players is just crashing waves into their tower and setting up turret dives with your jungler or by yourself. If you have a lead and your opponent is behind, then a turret dive is not risky whatsoever. Your opponent should die instantly to any decent combo. What we want to get at is that roams can be very inconsistent, and you should only force them when absolutely necessary. For example, if there's a 2-0 Fiora destroying your top lane Maokai, then yes, you may need to risk mid lane priority and some waves in order to help that lane before it becomes completely doomed. Otherwise, it's very important that you learn to punish your opponent in lane when you have a lead, so that you don't have to risk losing waves by going for low percentage plays around the map when you could just be killing your lane opponent. To wrap things up, playing from behind can definitely be a daunting task, but in lower elos, it's actually never as bad as it may seem. Remember that the point of this guide was that Hector was annoyed at how quickly people threw their leads, even when he was literally handing over multiple kills. Your opponents may very well be passively throwing their leads, so you shouldn't worry too much or panic or tilt if you die once or twice in lane. Focus on what you can do better, and more importantly, focus on not making the mistakes that we discussed in this guide. By the way, you should know where these videos come from. Our hyper improvement platform, SkillCapped, is by far the best place to be if you want to actually improve at League of Legends. You can input your rank before signing up to see where we think you'll climb to. If you don't reach that rank while actively using SkillCapped, you can claim a full refund. That's like a gym membership guaranteeing that you'll get ripped. We offer this because our service really does work, and if it doesn't, then you shouldn't pay for it. So be sure to check us out after this. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.